Here's the outline that we've been following, and we've reached the section highlighted in yellow there with Job and Elihu. We looked at the first part of that, of Job's final defense. The book began with that prologue in the first two chapters, setting the scene and the circumstances which led to the suffering that Job was experiencing. And then that long section that we worked our way through with the debate between Job and his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, those three rounds of speeches in which Job speaks, and then each of the friends give a reply to Job's speech. And then in chapter 28, we had an interlude on the subject of wisdom, whether that was Job's words or the words of the author of the book, we don't really know, but the emphasis there upon the subject of wisdom. And then we started in this section with Job and Elihu, which goes from chapter 29 through to chapter 37. And Job makes his final defense in chapters 29 to 31, and that's where we finished off last time. So this evening we're going to pick up here with Elihu's answer to Job from chapter 32, and that will go through to chapter 37. We won't cover all of that though this evening. So Job's final speech in chapters 29 to 31 had been a summary really of his predicament, and he continued to assert his innocence, that he was suffering for no apparent reason as far as he was concerned. He couldn't understand why he was going through this suffering. His friends had all been telling him that he was suffering because he was a bad person, because he had sinned, and this was God's way of punishing Job. But Job was aware that wasn't the case, that he was innocent, and so he continued to assert that right through to the end. And then we come into Elihu's speech over these 6 chapters, which is really a critical review of the debate that has taken place between Job and his 3 friends. So we'll look to begin with here in chapter 32 in verses 1 to 5. And the text says this: "These 3 men ceased replying to Job, for he considered himself right. Then Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, was angry at Job because he thought himself right against God. He was angry as well at his 3 friends because they found no reply, but merely condemned Job. Elihu waited out Job's speech, for they were all older than he. But when Elihu saw that the 3 men had nothing to reply, he was angry." So we're now introduced to a new character in the book. It's this man Elihu, and his name means "he is my God." His speeches are recorded over the next 6 chapters, and he speaks without interruption. And when he's finished speaking, there's no response from Job or his 3 friends. So the speeches are just recorded, and that's the end of it, really. The speeches can be divided into 4. Each speech is introduced in a similar way. So the first speech is introduced in verse 6 of chapter 32. "Then Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, said in reply." Then the second speech introduced in chapter 34, verse 1, "Elihu said in reply." And the third speech in chapter 35, verse 1, "Elihu said in reply." And then the fourth and final speech in chapter 36, "Then Elihu spoke once more." So the text can be divided up into these 4 speeches, each beginning in that similar way. And once he's finished speaking, Elihu is not mentioned again in the book. We hear no more about him. So after Job had finished speaking, his words ended in chapter 31 and verse 40. The last words there say, "The words of Job are at an end." So that was the end of Job speaking. None of his friends replied. And verse 1 tells us, verse 1 of chapter 32 tells us that none of his 3 friends replied to Job because he considered himself right. So they had nothing more to say to someone who as far as they were concerned, was righteous in his own eyes. So when the debate between Job and his three friends reached a stalemate, Elihu speaks up. He's introduced to us in verse 2 as Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram. As no other character in the book is given as much family background detail as this, but really nothing else is known about him. But Elihu is angry. His anger is referred to in these opening verses 4 times. One commentator has said we are surely to remember that he is an angry young man who is speaking. He's angry with Job. We're told that he's angry with Job because he thought himself right against God. The Revised Standard Version translates that as he justified himself rather than God. It's not just that Job was righteous in his own eyes, but rather that he thought that he was right and God was wrong, or at least that's Elihu's opinion of Job. But Elihu is also angry with Job's three friends. We're told in verse 2 and 3 here, he's angry with them because they found no reply, but merely condemned Job. So he's angry with everyone. He saw the three friends as incompetent in their arguments against Job. Verse 4 explains that Elihu had not spoken up to this point because they were all older than he. So out of respect for his elders, he had remained silent. But Elihu has been listening to everything that's been going on, and he's not impressed. He's angry that Job's three friends had nothing to reply. The attempts of the three friends to persuade Job that he's in the wrong, that he's suffering because he has sinned in some way, their attempts have all failed. And Job's attempt to show that he's in the right and God is in the wrong has also failed. And so Elihu is going to put them right. So his first speech here goes from chapter 32, verse 6, through to the end of chapter 33, verse 33. And we can outline it in this way, as on the slide there, that he begins by asserting his right to speak, and then he addresses Job directly. He gives a summary of Job's position, or at least as he views Job's position. He tells Job that God does speak to mankind, and God warns through sickness or ill health. But man can be redeemed from his situation, and so Job should listen. So that's a brief outline of this first speech. So we look here in chapter 32 and read verses 6 to verse 22 down to the end of the chapter here. So these are the words of Elihu. Then Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, said in reply, I have but few years while you are old. Therefore I was too awestruck and fearful to hold forth among you. I thought, let age speak, let advanced years declare wise things. But truly it is the spirit in men, the breath of Shaddai, that gives them understanding. It is not the aged who are wise, the elders who understand how to judge. Therefore I say, listen to me, I too would hold forth. Here I have waited out your speeches, I have given ear to your insights, while you probed the issues. But as I attended to you, I saw that none of you could argue with Job, or offer replies to his statements. I fear you will say, we have found the wise course. God will defeat him, not man. He did not set out his case against me, nor shall I use your reasons to reply to him. They have been broken and can no longer reply. Words fail them. I have waited till they stopped speaking, till they ended and no longer replied. Now I also would have my say. I too would like to hold forth, for I am full of words. The wind in my belly presses me. My belly is like wine not yet opened, like jugs of new wine ready to burst. Let me speak, then, and get relief. Let me open my lips and reply. I would not show regard for any man, or temper my speech for anyone's sake. for I do not know how to temper my speech. My Maker would soon carry me off. Elihu begins his speech here, first of all, by addressing Job's three friends. And Elihu explains that because of his age, that he is young and the friends are old, that he was too awestruck and fearful to speak. So he thought, let age speak, let advanced years declare wise things. Let the old men speak because they will have some wise things to say. But then he realized that just because people are old doesn't mean that they are wise. It is God, he says, the breath of Shaddai that gives them understanding. Wisdom is something that is imparted by the Spirit of God and gives understanding. And therefore Elihu claims that he also has the right to speak and to be heard. He's listened to their speeches, he's heard their insights whilst they probed the issues, but he saw that none of them could argue with Job or give satisfactory replies to Job's statements. Elihu had waited for the friends to stop speaking until their words failed them. And Elihu has been waiting so long to speak that he's now ready to burst forth. He says that his belly is like wine not yet opened, like jugs of new wine ready to burst. When wine ferments, it produces gas, carbon dioxide, and if there's no vent in the container to let the gas escape, the pressure will build up and the container will burst. And so Elihu is likening himself to this, that he cannot keep his words bottled up inside of himself any longer. He's not going to restrain himself in what he will say, and he will show no flattery or partiality. He's just going to let it all out, not caring what people might think. So he will not be pulling any punches, and he feels compelled to speak. And he says, well, if I don't speak in this way, well, my Maker would carry me off. So he has this compulsion. Well, I've got to speak, or this is all building up inside me, and I just have to let it out. So Elihu now addresses Job directly in chapter 33, verses 1 to 7. He says, but now, Job, listen to my words. Give ear to all that I say. Now I open my lips. My tongue forms words in my mouth. My words bespeak the uprightness of my heart. My lips utter insight honestly. The Spirit of God formed me. The breath of Shaddai sustains me. If you can, answer me. Argue against me. Take your stand. You and I are the same before God. I too was nipped from clay. You are not overwhelmed by fear of me. My pressure does not weigh heavily on you. Here Elihu is calling upon Job to listen to him, to pay attention to all that he has to say. And Elihu displays a self-important attitude as he claims that his words are upright and honest. It is, he says, the Spirit of God that has formed him and the breath of Shaddai, the Almighty, that sustains him. So he challenges Job to answer him. He says, well, we are the same before God. We're both made of clay. And so Job has no reason to feel overwhelmed with fear or to feel that he's under any pressure from Elihu. Elihu is saying, we can talk about this as equals. We're both the same in this. You answer me if you can. Well, he then goes on in verses 8 to 12 to give a summary, as he sees it, of Job's position, of what Job has been saying in his speeches. He says, indeed, you have stated in my hearing, I heard the word spoken. I am guiltless, free from transgression. I am innocent, without iniquity. But he finds reasons to oppose me, considers me his enemy. He puts my feet in stocks, watches all my ways. In this you are not right. I will answer you. God is greater than any man. Elihu says that he has heard Job make this claim that he is guiltless. He is free from transgression, innocent, without iniquity, and that he's done nothing to deserve his suffering. And yet, even so, God has found reason to oppose him and to consider him his enemy, to put his feet in the stocks and to watch all of his ways. And this is really a fairly accurate summary of Job's position. We see back in chapter 13 and verse 27 that Elihu is in effect alluding to things that Job had said here. In chapter 13, verse 27, Job is addressing God here, that you put my feet in the stocks and watch all my ways, hemming in my footsteps. And Elihu is quoting those words or alluding to them here. But Elihu declares that Job is not right in saying this, and Elihu's going to prove it. Elihu's position is summed up in verse 12. He says to Job, in this you are not right. You're not right to think like this. I will answer you. God is greater than any man. So God knows best, and no one has the right to question him. Job and God are not equals. They're not, that's how Job perhaps had seen the situation, that he could discuss things with God on an equal level. But Elihu says, well, that's not the case. God is greater than any man. In effect, he's saying, well, let me explain God's position to you. And he goes on then to say that God does speak to men. In verses 13 to 18, he goes on to say, why do you complain against him, that he does not reply to any of man's charges? For God speaks time and again, though man does not perceive it, in a dream, a night vision, when deep sleep falls on men while they slumber on their beds. Then he opens men's understanding, and by disciplining them leaves his signature, to turn man away from his action, to suppress pride in man. He spares him from the pit, his person from perishing by the sword. Job had, as we've seen, often complained that God was not listening to him. God wasn't replying to the charges being made against him. Again, Elihu is aware of this, and we can look back and see a couple of the places where Job says this kind of thing in chapter 9 and verse 16. Job says of God here, if I summoned him and he responded, I do not believe he would lend me his ear. God isn't listening. And then in chapter 19, verse 7, I cry violence, but I'm not answered. I shout, but can get no justice. And these were Job's complaints, and Elihu is aware of that. And so Job's made the complaint that God's not listening to him or replying to him. But Elihu argues here that God does speak, and God speaks time and again, he says. But it's that man does not recognize it. Man is not listening. Man doesn't hear God speak. God speaks, he says, in dreams or by night visions whilst people are asleep. And his purpose in doing this is to discipline man, to turn him away from his actions, to suppress his pride, and to spare him from the pit, and to spare him from perishing. So Elihu's argument to Job here is, well, you're saying that God isn't listening. In fact, you're the one not listening, because God is speaking. You're not hearing it, and he's speaking in order to help you. And then he says that in verses 19 to 22 that God warns through sickness or ill health. He says here in verse 19, he is reproved by pains on his bed, and the trembling in his bones is constant. He detests food. Fine food is repulsive to him. His flesh wastes away till it cannot be seen, and his bones are rubbed away till they are invisible. He comes close to the pit. His life verges on death. A man may also be reproved then by God through the experience of physical sickness. not just by God speaking to him, but by these other experiences as well. And he describes some of the symptoms here. He speaks of pain, of a man in pain on his bed. He speaks of the constant trembling in his bones, the loss of appetite, his flesh wasting away, and his bones becoming visible. The man is close to the pit, he says. He's on the verge of death. But such a thing, such an experience, is a warning to take note. And then Elihu goes on to say that man can be redeemed from this situation, from this condition, in verses 23 to 28. He says, if he has a representative, one advocate against 1,000, to declare the man's uprightness, then he has mercy on him and decrees, redeem him from descending to the pit, for I have obtained his ransom. Let his flesh be healthier than in his youth. Let him return to his younger days. He prays to God and is accepted by him. He enters his presence with shouts of joy, for he requites a man for his righteousness. He declares to men, I have sinned, I have perverted what was right, but I was not paid back for it. He redeemed him from passing into the pit. He will enjoy the light. Truly, God does all these things 2 or 3 times to a man, to bring him back from the pit, that he may bask in the light of life. If there is a representative for an advocate to speak on man's behalf and to declare his righteousness, then God will be merciful, and God will redeem him from the pit. His health will be restored to what it was in his younger days. He will pray to God, and he will be accepted by him. He will enter the presence of God with shouts of joy. And although he may have sinned, he's not going to be paid back for it. Instead, he is redeemed. He is saved from the pit. And this is what this is what God does, and God will do, he says, 2 or 3 times. And so the purpose of suffering, as it states in verse 30, is to bring him back from the pit, that he may bask in the light of life. This is why you're suffering, so that God will bring you back. So Elihu takes a more positive view of suffering than Job's other 3 friends. Suffering is not the punishment for sin, as they said, but in a way it can be beneficial. It can be strengthening, and it can teach us. And therefore, at the end of the chapter here, verse 31 to 33, he says, pay heed, Job, and hear me. Be still, and I will speak. If you have what to say, answer me. Speak, for I'm eager to vindicate you. But if not, you listen to me. Be still, and I will teach you wisdom. Job should then be still. He should listen to what Elihu has to say. Elihu says that he's eager to vindicate Job. He wants to see Job put in the right. And if Job has anything to say, well, he should speak up about it. But if not, well, just listen to what Elihu has to say, because Elihu is going to teach him some wisdom. We come then to the second speech of Elihu in chapter 34. And he begins this speech in the first 9 verses by making an accusation against Job of impiety. Chapter 34, verses 1 to 9 says this, Elihu said in reply, listen, O wise men, to my words. You who have knowledge, give ear to me. For the ear tests arguments as the palate tastes food. Let us decide for ourselves what is just. Let us know among ourselves what is good. For Job has said, I am right. God has deprived me of justice. I declare the judgment against me false. My arrow wound is deadly, though I am free from transgression. What man is like Job, who drinks mockery like water, who makes common cause with evildoers and goes with wicked men? For he says, man gains nothing, when he is in God's favor. Elihu addresses this second speech to wise men who have knowledge and men of understanding. As he says in verse 2, listen, O wise men, to my words. You who have knowledge, give ear to me. And then in verse 10, he'll say, therefore, men of understanding, listen to me. So he's addressing those who are wise. Verse 3 is a repeat of chapter 12 and verse 11. Verse 3, he says, for the ear tests arguments as the palate tastes food. And that statement was made earlier in chapter 12 and verse 11. Job had said it there. Truly the ear tests arguments as the palate tastes food. And it's a call for words to be carefully considered. Listen carefully in the same way as you might taste food or savor food in the mouth. Do the same with the things that you hear. Be careful and listen carefully. And Elihu sides with the wise men to work out what is just and good. In verse 4 there he says, let us decide for ourselves what is just. Let us know among ourselves what is good. So let's have this discussion amongst ourselves. Elihu restates and he summarizes Job's position again in verses 5 and 6, that Job has asserted that he is right or he's innocent, but God has deprived him of justice and that he has been wounded by God's arrows. Again, Elihu is picking up on some of the things that Job has said earlier. In chapter 27 and verse 2, Job had said there that God is the one who has deprived me of justice. He says, so Elihu picks up on that. And then in chapter 6 and verse 4, Job had spoken of how God was firing arrows at him. For the arrows of the Almighty are in me, my spirit absorbs their poison. So here in verses 5 and 6 of chapter 34, Elihu is quoting those things back. Job has said, I am right, God has deprived me of justice. I declare the judgment against me false. My arrow wound is deadly, though I am free from transgression. Elihu then makes this unfounded attack upon Job's character when he says that he drinks mockery like water. Mockery is indulged in as frequently as drinking water. It's as if he's saying that Job is always constantly mocking God, mocking other people perhaps. And also he accuses Job of keeping company with evildoers and wicked men. In verse 7 there, 7:8, verse 8, he says, of Job, who makes common cause with evildoers and goes with wicked men. What man is like Job, who drinks mockery like water, who makes common cause with evildoers and goes with wicked men? For he says, man gains nothing when he is in God's favor. So he's making that accusation that Job is saying that there's nothing to be gained from a right relationship with God. What benefit is there if you're in God's favor? That was something that one of Job's friends, Eliphaz, had said back in chapter 22 and verse 2, in one of Eliphaz's speeches and replies to Job. He had said, can a man be of use to God? A wise man benefit him? What good can man do to God? What gain is there for man? Well, then in verses 10 to 15, Elihu seeks to defend God, to speak up on behalf of God. Job has made these charges against God, that God has been unfair, God has been unjust. And so Elihu is going to take up God's cause and speak in defense of God here. So verse 10 to 15, he says, therefore, men of understanding, listen to me. Wickedness be far from God. wrongdoing from Shaddai, for he pays a man according to his actions and provides for him according to his conduct. For God surely does not act wickedly. Shaddai does not pervert justice. Who placed the earth in his charge? Who ordered the entire world? If he but intends it, he can call back his spirit and breath. All flesh would at once expire, and mankind return to dust. So Elihu says that God can do no wrong. Wickedness is far from God. Wrongdoing from Shaddai. God doesn't do anything that is wrong. And God deals with mankind according to his actions and according to his conduct. It's in verse 11 there, he says, he pays a man according to his actions and provides for him according to his conduct. So God does not act wickedly. God doesn't pervert justice. Here, Elihu is joining really with the other characters in the book and expresses the principle of retribution, that God acts according to man's behavior, that God will respond according to the way in which man behaves. But as the creator, he is not accountable to anyone. He's not dependent on anyone. And control of the universe was not something entrusted to him by some greater power. In verse 13 there, Elihu asks of God, who placed the earth in his charge? Who put God in charge of the earth? Or who ordered the entire world? So God is the one who's in control. No one put the earth under God's control. And all life itself depends upon God. And if God calls back his spirit and his breath, then life would end and mankind would return to the dust. In verse 14 and 15, he says, but if he but intends it, he can call back his spirit and breath. All flesh would at once expire and mankind return to dust. So all life is dependent upon God. God takes away life and then that's the end of it. Elihu's argument here seems to be that if everything God does is good and God is in control of everything, then what is happening to Job must also be good, because God is good. Everything God does is good, and therefore, if God is causing Job to suffer, then that must be good as well. One commentator has made this point, that Elihu's God is a God of almighty justice. Is he the author of all things? Is he the author of evil? Elihu seems to get very near to saying so here. For him, might is right. So if God is almighty, if God is God of goodness, then what about evil? Is God responsible for the creation of evil? And Elihu seems to be verging on saying that kind of thing here. Well, he then goes on in verses 16 to 30 to address Job again, and talks now about the justice of God. In verse 16, he begins, if you would understand, listen to this, give ear to what I say. Would one who hates justice govern? Would you condemn the just mighty one? Would you call a king a scoundrel, great men wicked? He is not partial to princes. The noble are not preferred to the wretched, for all of them are the work of his hands. Some die suddenly in the middle of the night. People are in turmoil and pass on. Even great men are removed, not by human hands, for his eyes are upon a man's ways. He observes his every step. Neither darkness nor gloom offers a hiding place for evildoers. He has no set time for man to appear before God in judgment. He shatters mighty men without number and sets others in their place. Truly he knows their deeds. Night is over and they're crushed. He strikes them down with the wicked where people can see, because they have been disloyal to him and have not understood any of his ways. Thus he lets the cry of the poor come before him. He listens to the cry of the needy. When he is silent, who will condemn? If he hides his face, who will see him, be it nation or man? The impious man rule no more, nor do those who ensnare the people. Has he said to God, I will bear my punishment and offend no more? What I cannot see, you teach me. If I have done iniquity, I shall not do so again. Should he require it as you see fit? But you have despised him. You must decide, not I. Speak what you know. This section of the speech here then is addressed to Job, and it concerns the justice of God. If God is unjust, as Job has argued, then how could God govern the world? His government implies justice, Elihu suggests. And Elihu argues that God shows no partiality. He treats everyone the same. He punishes the wicked suddenly and without trial. And to Elihu, the downfall of wicked rulers is evidence that God is at work. So God has no reason to be unjust, to act unjustly. God's ability to know everything and his presence everywhere is something that guarantees his justice. God does not have a set time for judgment, but he will judge at any appropriate moment. But what if God is silent, as Job has complained? What if it seems that God isn't saying anything? Well, who has the right to question him about that? And God's silence does not mean that God is not active. His justice is administered fairly, both to nations and to individuals. In verses 31 to 37, to the end of the chapter, Elihu accuses Job now of rebellion. He says, has he said to God, he is referring to Job, has he said to God, I will bear my punishment and offend no more? What I cannot see, you teach me. If I have done iniquity, I shall not do so again. So as Job said that, he's asking, should he, that's God, requite as you see fit? But you have despised him. You must decide, not I. Speak what you know. Men of understanding say to me, wise men who hear me. Job does not speak with knowledge. His words lack understanding. Would that Job were tried to the limit for answers which befit sinful men. He adds to his sin. He increases his transgression among us. He multiplies his statements against God. So Elihu thinks that Job is being rebellious, that he is speaking without knowledge and without insight. And Elihu claims that the wise men agree with him on this. So Job needs to be tried to the limit. He needs to be pushed to the limit for answers which will befit sinful man. Job has been speaking, Elihu thinks, like a sinful man. And he accuses Job of adding rebellion to his sin. In verse 37 there, he adds to his sin. He increases his transgression among us. He multiplies his statements against God. These are his accusations against Job. And at this point, really, Elihu's view of Job is no different to the others. The other three friends had said much the same. Job is in the wrong. Job is by denying his sinfulness. He's just multiplying that and making things worse for himself. And Job's questioning of God then is seen as sin. And so what Job must do, as the other three friends had also suggested, is that, well, Job must repent in order to be relieved of his suffering. Stop sinning, and it will be okay. And this is what Elihu is suggesting in verses 31 and 32 there. Has he said to God, I will bear my punishment and offend no more? What I cannot see, you teach me. If I have done iniquity, I shall not do so again. So this is Elihu's advice to Job, that that's what he needs to do. But Job's refusal to accept his suffering and learn from it is regarded by Elihu as this rebellion against God. That brings us to the end of Elihu's second speech, and where we'll finish for this evening, and then we'll continue looking at the final two speeches, chapters 35 to 37. We'll look at those next week. So a couple of questions to think about from this evening then. How would you describe Elihu's state of mind when he addresses Job? And how does Elihu's view of Job's situation differ to that of the other three friends? A couple of things to think about.